Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a very interesting little title, L of G's, obviously Leaves of Grass, Purport. Now, this is poem 27 of the 31. We now are down to the last 5 poems of the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass. And this is poem 27 of the 31 of Goodbye My Fancy, the second annex cluster. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, and that you are as well exposed to our introductory set of comments for this cluster, Goodbye My Fancy, which is finished with Mirages. Now, our Nortons will tell us about this one, that it was first published in Goodbye My Fancy, 1891. Manuscript evidence exists in any number of places that this poem, an old age companion piece to earlier statements of intent, such as Oneself I Sing and Small the Theme of My Chant, was actually first projected in part as 3 separate poems. Notice the present lines 1 and 2 under the title Leaves of Grass Purport, lines 6, 7, and 8 and 9 under the title My Task, and lines 10, 11, 12 under the title Death Dogs My Steps. That these 3 were added 2 lines under the title For Us Too, Reader Dear, which were finally published in another part of Goodbye My Fancy, part 44. Now, I find this a fascinating poem because in some ways here, we're going to get Whitman's statement of the aim of Leaves of Grass and the way it grew, that is to say, the evolution of the poem. In fact, evolution will get used in this poem, the very word itself. He said to Tribble, Whitman did, quote, Leaves of Grass and evolution are one. We can't know what we are bound to, but bound to something, question mark, end quote. He says, we can't doubt it. No, can't. And then and that was the end of the quote. So, as we've said, evolution has been central. And then finally, this appeal to death at the conclusion of his life. We've seen this a number of times. Now, you'll remember that L of G, that is to say that using the letters just L of G to represent Leaves of Grass was part of the preface note to this very second annex, Goodbye My Fancy. And Purport will take us back to Eidolons, which was used twice there. Overall, Purport was used 12 times in Leaves of Grass, but it was used twice in Eidolons. He says it this way, not to exclude or demarcate, the only use of that word in Leaves of Grass, or pick out evils, remember those evils that were maybe listed in Brooklyn Ferry 6, from their formidable masses, even to expose them. You could make the argument Leaves of Grass has been in large measure about exposing a lot of things that Whitman doesn't like. But, notice the construction of not but this is what Leaves of Grass he says it was for. Add, fuse, complete, extend, and celebrate the immortal and the good. So in other words, he's going to make the argument that in the end, what Leaves of Grass was really about was celebration. Then, part 2, haughty, this song. And you'll remember haughty from As I Pondered in Silence, I Too Haughty, you'll remember. Haughty, this song, its words and scope, to span vast realms of space and time. Again, back to Song of Myself 46, I know I have the best of time and space. Evolution, dash, the cumulative, dash, growths and generations. You'll remember in Song of the Universal too, mystic evolution, and now we're at the end of Leaves of Grass, we'll use this word evolution. In other words, the way that Leaves of Grass, as he sees it, has evolved or grown. Then, begun in ripened youth, you'll remember this, that he says at the beginning of Song of Myself, passage 1, that, you know, he is in good health, hoping not to see till death and all of that, you'll remember. Begun in ripened youth, and steadily pursued. It's fun to go back to that line, so let's just do it for a second and look at that very opening set of lines, because here we are at the end, and we're going to do more of this obviously as we finish Leaves of Grass. He says it this way, I now 37 years old in perfect health begin, hoping to cease not till death. Looking back at that, he says that it was ripened youth, right? So you can decide if that's too old or not, you guys. Wandering, we know that word picture, that Odyssean word picture. Peering, I love that from Song of Myself 8, that idea of the curiosity and the wonder. Dallying, he says, with all. You'll remember this word dallying from Song of the Open Road 13. And then the dash. And what is the all? Well, it's obviously war, peace, day, and night, absorbing. And this idea of absorbing I mean, think about it. You call your collection Leaves of Grass, and then they use this word. And then he says, with 2 lines, never even for 1 hour abandoning my task. Again, going back, hoping to cease not till death. I end it here. So now it's the third part of the poem as he references the coming death. I end it here, and notice his trinities: sickness, poverty, and old age. Well, of course, it's the middle one that Whitman probably was the most offended by. Sickness, if you live long enough, is inevitably coming, as our story of Gautama Buddha tells us in those early years when he saw those on those 3 days. Obviously, old age attends with sickness. But it's the poverty one that probably for Whitman was the most disturbing. He never could quite wrap his brain around the fact that this collection of poems would not be completely adopted and accepted in his own lifetime, and at least to make him some money, and it never was. Of course, today we're just blown away by that fact, aren't we? He says it as he finishes, I sing of life, yet mind me well of death. Again, he's always thinking about both sides of that yin-yang symbol, right? Today, shadowy death, notice capitalized. Today, shadowy death dogs my steps, my seated shape. After his stroke, of course, he had to sit for longer and longer spells. He couldn't do the kind of walking that he loved. And has for years, again the dash, draws something close to me as face to face. I think he's channeling a lot of Brooklyn Ferry here. You'll remember Face to Face from Brooklyn Ferry 1. Well, what are we going to do with a poem like this? I think his argument is that the greatest artists create all the way to the end, and they have expectations all the way to the end. And obviously, we're already starting to see this in all 5 of these last poems of the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass. We see Whitman's sense of, it's really, really hard to let go. At 2b, notice the word purport. Its noun has the value of meaning. As a verb, purport can mean to appear, right? To profess something, possibly fallaciously. So it's interesting here what he means with purport. His own or someone else's. I find that fascinating. At 3a, well, we can't help but read a poem like this and remember Emily Dickinson's "This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me." Remember that last line, "Judge tenderly of me"? We've given a full lecture at learnstrong.net over that poem. Finally, at 3b, what creation in your life will be most important to you, do you think, possibly at your death? And obviously, because you're so young, maybe you haven't really started to create it yet. I hope Leaves of Grass inspires you, though. Thank you.